Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 10. The Evolution of the Exorcist. Exorcisms have been a part of Christianity ever since the days of Jesus Christ. In the biblical Gospels, Jesus himself is involved in a handful of exorcisms. In the Gospel of Luke, a boy becomes possessed by a demon and foams at the mouth while violently spasming. But then Jesus comes along and uses his holy powers to expel the demon from the child's body. Jesus also promises his followers that with the strength of God, they too can banish demons. In the 2nd century AD, Christians used the name of Jesus during rituals to expel evil spirits from the souls of their friends. In the early days of Christianity, exorcisms were even used to convert people. Priests would perform exorcisms in public spaces as a way to convince non-believers of their spiritual power. They were trying to make people believe that Christians were able to perform more effective exorcisms than the pagans. Things really started to heat up in the Middle Ages, though. That was when specific priests were trained by the church specifically to become exorcists. This is still the case today in the Roman Catholic Church and most Eastern Orthodox traditions. But not all exorcisms were as intense as you see in the movies. The Middle Ages saw the rise of something called the minor exorcism. This was used on people who weren't necessarily possessed by evil. During baptisms, a minor exorcism would be performed under the assumption that everyone is already under some kind of evil spiritual control. It was in the 15th century that demons became a thing to be feared in Western Europe. These were the days of witch trials and demonologists. There are so many accounts of priests exorcising demons between the 15th and 17th century that it would be impossible to list them all. Priests became so crazed for exorcisms they began to banish evil spirits from animals too. It wouldn't be until the Enlightenment, a period that began in the 17th century and ended in the 19th century, that Europeans stopped believing in the superstitions of demonic possession. Intellectuals and the church itself started to accept that psychology was likely behind demonic possession. However, the Catholic Church has never stopped training exorcists, and one of the biggest driving forces of exorcisms today is Pentecostalism, a branch of Christianity that emphasizes spiritual experience in everyday life. One of the few places in the world where the belief in demonic possession remains high is the United States of America. And now for number 9. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out to Carrier, Aubrey and Amanda Marshall. Thanks so much for watching and supporting OE. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Number 9. Roland Doe. Exorcism wouldn't be the hot topic it is today without William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel called The Exorcist. The book turned into a horror film in 1973, and since then, Americans have been obsessed. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the events from the fictional movie The Exorcist were inspired by a real case. In the 1940s, a group of priests from the Roman Catholic Church performed exorcisms on a boy who was only identified as Roland Doe. Roland was born into a family of Lutherans who lived in Maryland. He was an only child, and at a young age he was introduced by his aunt to a Ouija board. According to those close to the case, it all started after the death of Roland's aunt. This was when the family started to experience strange noises. Furniture was moving on its own, and vases would fly off the shelf and shatter against the wall. But these strange occurrences would only happen whenever the boy was nearby. Eventually, the family reached out to their local pastor, Luther Miles Schultz. Even the pastor was a bit dubious though, so he agreed to watch over the boy for a night and see for himself what was going on within the home. Much to the priest's shock, household objects and furniture moved on their own when the boy was in the room. The priest then suggested that the family get in touch with the Catholics. It's unclear how many exorcisms Roland Doe was involved in, but it was a lot. A Roman Catholic priest named Edward Hughes conducted one at Georgetown University Hospital. During the exorcism, the boy supposedly slipped out of his restraints and used a broken bed spring to slash the priest's arm. The exorcism was then deemed a failure, and the family relocated to St. Louis. But the boy's demonic possession continued in the new city. Once more, priests visited Roland, this time with scientists from College Church and St. Louis University. Everyone involved witnessed the bed shaking and heard the boy speaking in tongues using a voice that wasn't his own. The Archbishop then granted permission for another exorcism, and this one took place at the Alexian Brothers Hospital, where psychologists assisted the priests. During the exorcism, one of the Jesuit priests claimed he saw the words hell and evil appear on the boy's flesh, as if by magic. There were supposedly other exorcisms on the boy that all failed. The one in St. Louis seemed to do the trick though. The priests, without ever revealing the boy's name, said he went on to live a perfectly normal life after the demon was forced out of his body. Number 8. Clara Jamana Chele. At a small mission school in South Africa, Father Erasmus Horner heard a very unusual confession from one of his Catholic students. The year was 1906 and the student's name was Clara Jamana Chele. In a confession booth, the young girl admitted that she'd made a pact with the devil. At first, the priest didn't take too much of Clara's confession to heart. After all, she was only a young girl, and he attributed the confession to an active imagination. But then the strange and erratic behavior started, causing the nuns and priests at the school to become increasingly concerned. Then on August 20th, 1906, Clara ripped her clothes off like a transforming werewolf and began to growl. She then had a full-blown conversation in a bizarre voice with entities no one else could see. Clara was quoted as saying, "You have betrayed me, you have promised me days of glory, but now you treat me cruelly." It was believed that Clara was arguing with whatever evil entity she'd made a pact with, which had evidently betrayed her. One of the nuns wrote that she'd never heard an animal make a sound like what was released from Clara's body. She also said that neither a lion nor a bull could make such a horrifying noise. In the days that followed, Clara began to develop powers. She divulged secrets from the personal lives of those near her, and she could somehow speak foreign languages that she'd never heard before. She was also imbued with inhuman strength and would often break through her restraints. And then there was the levitating. Clara would levitate 5 feet off her bed, only to be brought back down on the mattress by a quick spray of holy water. The exorcism was performed on September 11th, 1906. It lasted the entire morning and continued into the dark hours of the night. Clara nearly strangled one priest to death during the ordeal, but in the end, the demon left her body. And around 170 people witnessed the whole thing at the chapel. But this story isn't over yet. A year later, Clara made another pact with the devil, and this time the exorcism lasted 2 days. When the demon was finally vanquished yet again, everyone in the room reported smelling the foulest odor imaginable. No record exists as to what happened to Clara after the second possession, but hopefully she stopped trusting the devil. Number 7. The Popes Exorcist. Father Gabriel Amorth passed away in 2016. Prior to the priest's death, he admitted to national news outlets that he'd performed no less than 100,000 exorcisms in his life. But you've likely never heard of any of them. That's because Father Amorth was the official exorcist of the Vatican, and the exorcisms he performed were top secret. Father Amorth was born in Italy in 1925. He fought with the resistance in World War II against the fascists, and after the war he earned himself a law degree and worked briefly as a journalist. He didn't become a priest until 1951. After many years of priestly duty, Gabriel was appointed assistant to Cardinal Ugo Paletti in 1986. Paletti was the chief exorcist of Rome at the time. After Paletti's death, Father Amorth took over his position. He remained in a position for the rest of his life and even wrote a book about it called An Exorcist Tells His Story. One of his greatest accomplishments was founding the International Association of Exorcists, an unusual organization that still exists today. Nowadays, exorcisms are making a huge comeback. The practice stopped being popular at the end of the 1600s, but in 2017, Pope Francis sent a message to priests saying they shouldn't hesitate to call an exorcist whenever it seems necessary. Before his death, Father Amorth admitted that 98% of his patients needed a psychiatrist more than a priest. He also said the other 2% were definitely possessed by a demon. But 2% of 100,000 is still 2,000, and that's a lot of demonic possessions going on right under our noses. Number 6. Annelise Michelle. Annelise Michelle grew up in West Germany in the 1960s. Her family was devoutly Catholic, and she lived a fairly normal life. But then the unexpected happened when Annelise was just 16 years old. One day she blacked out at school and strolled around in a fugue state, and when she finally snapped out of it, she couldn't remember anything that happened. Her friends at school and her family said it was as if she'd fallen into a trance. The event came and went, and nobody thought much of it. But a year later, something similar occurred. Annelise woke up in a trance and peed her bed. She also started to convulse uncontrollably. This was 1960s Germany, a time when people didn't typically treat demonic possession as a reality. So Annelise went to a neurologist instead of a priest. The doctors diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that can cause seizures, memory loss, and hallucinations. It's been attributed to demonic possession since the days of the Babylonians. Annelise was then given drugs, and she enrolled in university. But the drugs didn't help, and by the end of the year, Annelise wholeheartedly believed she was possessed by a demonic entity. The biggest thing about Annelise's possession was that she was aware of it. She saw the face of the devil in reflective surfaces, and she claimed that demons whispered in her ears. And as she tried to sleep at night, horrible voices spoke inside her head. According to Annelise, they told her she was damned and would rot eternally in hell. Annelise was the one who sought out priests to help her with her possession, but the priest she spoke to wouldn't do it and instead told her that she needed medicine. By this point, Annelise was rapidly deteriorating. She was eating spiders and biting the heads off birds, and she did even worse things that we can't mention because they're so horrific. But then, finally, priest Ernst Alt agreed to perform an exorcism. Annelise would undergo 67 exorcisms over the next 10 months. The priests involved believed she was possessed by Lucifer, Judas, Roman Emperor Nero, and Adolf Hitler. Unfortunately, though, these attempts to save Annelise proved unsuccessful, and she passed away on July 1st, 1976. Her death, however, didn't come from the demons inside her, but from malnutrition and dehydration. As a result, her parents and the priests involved were charged with negligent homicide. The priests were found guilty of manslaughter and given 6 months in jail, though the sentence was suspended. Her parents weren't given any punishment since the courts decided they'd suffered enough. It's still unclear from a spiritual standpoint what happened to Annelise. Scientists say it was a clear case of mental illness gone horribly wrong, but what do you think? Did Annelise die from being possessed by a dead Roman emperor, or was it negligence since the priest allowed her to waste away and starve? Number 5. Mesopotamian exorcisms. Ancient Mesopotamia is most famous for being home to the first truly complex society of people on the planet. These civilizations developed agriculture and animal domestication 8,000 years ago, and by 3000 BC, they built the first great cities and invented written language. They even built the first wheel and performed the first ever exorcism. Scientists know what happened in ancient Mesopotamia because of the preserved writing they left behind. The Library of Ashurbanipal contains a wealth of ancient tablets detailing the reigns of monarchs and military campaigns. Other tablets discuss ancient codes of law, trade routes, and even things like domestic disputes. It's through these texts that scientists came to learn about the world's first exorcists. A series of tablets written around 700 BC detail a ceremony used to drive away evil. The ceremony could be used to banish evil magic and protect the target from further corruption. It could also cripple the person responsible for casting the evil spell in the first place. The tablets contain nearly 100 spells and incantations to be uttered during the ritual, and on the final tablet are the directions for what to do throughout the ceremony. Scientists believe this is the first exorcist guide ever written. It was intended to teach early exorcists how to banish evil. They weren't kicking demons out of souls, but it was still extremely similar. These kinds of ceremonies would be adapted in the years to come to combat evil spirits and treacherous demons. Have you ever used a Ouija board? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, subscribe. Number 4. Anna Eklund. Anna Eklund is the main character in the 1930s book Begone Satan. It was written by Carl Vogel and was used for inspiration in the 2016 film The Exorcism of Anna Eklund. But Anna's real name was most likely Emma Schmidt. She was born in Marathon, Wisconsin in 1882. Her mother perished in 1890, leaving the 8-year-old girl with her alcoholic father. Carl Vogel most likely heard the story secondhand and then changed the name in his book out of respect for the family. But most of the facts are the same as what happened to little Emma in rural Wisconsin. Emma attended church regularly until something weird happened at the age of 14. Emma could no longer enter a church without violent thoughts consuming her. She had uncontrollable visions of hurting priests and desecrating the church grounds. And eventually, these bizarre thoughts became so bad that Emma stopped going to church altogether. That was when locals got in touch with Father Theophilus Reisinger. Theophilus was a German Capuchin priest who moved to the Midwest in 1912. And soon after he arrived, he performed the first exorcism on Emma. At first, it seemed to be a success. Emma was able to go back into church without worrying about attacking somebody. Rumors at the time claimed that Emma was possessed because of her Aunt Mina, who was apparently a witch. She put cursed herbs in Emma's food to force demonic entities into her body. Emma was then besieged by demonic entities again in August 1928. Her possession was so bad the second time that she had to be restrained on an iron bed. Her body twisted and contorted unnaturally as she vomited bile and other nasty liquids. But after several months, Emma was finally freed of her demons on December 23rd. She jumped out of bed and said the demons were gone. Then she got back to her life as normal and was never possessed again. Number 3. Medieval demons. Archaeologists excavating an ancient Roman villa in England came across an unusual skeleton. The skeleton belonged to a man who lived during the Middle Ages, and according to experts, he may have been buried in the remote countryside because of a jaw deformity that made the community think he was full of evil spirits. A small hole in his head seems to suggest that he may have had surgery to try to exorcise those evil spirits. Hampshire archaeology says the man was between 35 and 40 years old when he died. His right hand was missing and some of his foot bones were gone when they found him. It's unclear if the damage was done before death as a punishment or if it was the result of grave robbers. The hole drilled into his skull, however, definitely happened prior to death. Dave Allen, a member of the archaeological team, says the hole in the man's skull was either to relieve chronic pain or to make a route for the demons to escape. The man's lower jaw was deformed, likely because of a problematic birth, and it would have started to be noticeable before he was even a year old. Deformities weren't something you'd want to have in the Middle Ages. Anyone who looked even remotely different was viewed with great suspicion in medieval European communities. When somebody wasn't quite right, locals were quick to blame demons or witchcraft. In this case, it seems the community attributed demons to the man's unusual appearance. To fix the man's deformity, a doctor used a primitive bone drill to get the demons out of his head. But when that didn't work, who knows what happened. New growth tissue over the wound shows the operation was successful and the man lived after the surgery. But then he was buried in the middle of nowhere, face down in a shallow grave. Even though he survived the surgery, he was obviously still shunned and despised by his community. Number 2. The Tsar Ritual. The ancient Tsar Ritual began in Ethiopia, though there's no known date for its origins. Legend has it the practice first came about in the Ethiopian city of Harar, then spread into Eritrea and Somalia. It eventually became its own cult, with rituals being held across Africa and all the way into Egypt and Persia. Very little is known of the Tsar Ritual other than what travelers in the 19th century wrote. One traveler described the cultists sacrificing a goat and mixing its blood with butter, and this was all apparently done to heal someone who was sick. The whole point behind the Tsar Ritual is to banish demons and evil entities. It's a type of exorcism that's been around since the days of the Abyssinian dynasty, which was founded in the 13th century AD. In Ethiopia, Tsar is a word that describes a malevolent spirit or demon. The belief in such creatures of the spirit realm is widespread even today in Christian and Muslim communities. But exactly how the ritual unfolds depends on which spirit is possessing the person in need of the exorcism. In local folklore, there are over 88 different emissaries of evil who can corrupt a person's soul and cause them to grow sick. The thing that's really unique about the Tsar Ritual is that it's mostly women in charge of it. Women gather together, sing and dance to drive out the evil forces occupying the afflicted. While they don't typically spill blood anymore, women still perform the ritual on a fairly regular basis. Unlike the exorcisms we think of today, the Tsar Ritual is ancient and has nothing to do with the church. Number 1. Martha Brassiere. Martha Brassiere was a faker. In France during the 16th century, Martha accompanied her father across the country and exhibited herself on stage while pretending to be possessed by a demon. Martha would contort her body as though the spirits were angling her limbs unnaturally. She could roll her eyes in the back of her head and rumble guttural speech from her stomach. To the peasants who showed up to watch the performances, Martha looked as though she were possessed by the devil himself. But it was all for entertainment purposes. Her father had worked as a weaver before the traveling show and never made much money. But after his daughter displayed symptoms of demonic possession, he had the idea to make money from it. Their claim was that Martha had been cursed by a witch who lived next door, and that she couldn't get the demon out of her body. While the father and daughter duo were on the road, priests would often show up to their performances and try to exorcise Martha's demon. Martha would act as if the attempt worked and the demon was gone. But seconds later, the entity would come back. Soon enough, Martha and her father caught the attention of Michelle Mariscal, King Henry IV's personal physician. The whole country had learned of the traveling possessed girl, and Michelle was given the task of finding out the truth. The physician used a fragment of wood that he claimed came from the very cross Jesus Christ was crucified on to taunt the demons living inside Martha. She reacted violently to the piece of wood, but then Michelle revealed that it was just an ordinary piece of lumber. There was nothing special about it. Michelle had put the real piece of the cross in Martha's mouth to depress her tongue while he studied her, and yet she hadn't reacted at all to what Michelle claimed was the real piece of the cross. In the end, Martha and her father were exposed as frauds. The faker was then thrown in jail for several months, and when she got out, Martha took her weird show underground. In the years to follow, she'd hold seances in secret, but nobody knows what became of her. Do you believe demons really possess people? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.